Welcome to the Best of Beaver County, presented by St. Barnabas, a weekly segment dedicated to putting the focus on the amazing things and the amazing people behind them in Beaver County. The Best of Beaver County is sponsored by and content is provided by St. Barnabas. The show airs every Thursday from 11 to 11:30 on WBBP, WMBA, 99.3 FM, and Facebook Live. Now, with no further ado, let's welcome host Mike Romigh to introduce today's program.
Good morning and welcome to the Best of Beaver County radio show on the St. Barnabas Radio Network. Since 1900 and counting, the St. Barnabas health system has become a trusted name in healthcare, focusing on compassionate and quality care. Today in Allegheny, Beaver, and Butler counties, we offer a full continuum of care for our patients, residents, and retirement community family. The St. Barnabas Health System has developed into a visionary leader in the healthcare industry, offering an array of unparalleled healthcare services from skilled nursing to extensive memory care activities and programs. Additionally, the medical center has world-class doctor and dentistry teams, which patients can receive a full range of services under one roof that also include comprehensive rehabilitation, home health and home care, hospice care, and palliative care. Building upon its heritage, St. Barnabas continues to reach out to those in need and lives out its mission through individual and institutional services, which help the health and social needs of those in our care by increasing the quality of their life. Men and women are invited to join in the work of continuing Christian caring, healing, and teaching, and along with St. Barnabas, bear witness to its founder's reminder, God is able. The East Palestine train derailment remains in the news. We thought, and actually we hope, that it would be beneficial to talk with, and if you will, someone who has had boots on the ground. Mr. Mark Durno is our guest. Mark is a Homeland Security Advisor, U.S. EPA Region 5, and has been dispatched to East Palestine where the train derailment occurred. While reading some of his background information, Mark and his team have been dispatched to various emergency and counterterrorism incidents. I shook his hand earlier, and he was investigating anthrax. He's been to Flint, Michigan, with the water situation in Flint, Michigan, and also Hurricane Katrina. Now in East Palestine. Do I need hand sanitizer or anything like that? Because
no, I think we're okay, Mike. And thanks for having me. I appreciate the invite. Appreciate you helping us get the word out. Hand sanitizer, no. But good hygiene. I think we learned that during the COVID situation. Good hygiene is always a good practice.
Right. So tell us a little bit about yourself. You were telling me you're a former Pittsburgher, former Steeler fan. Now you live in Cleveland, so you're a Browns fan. You lived in Irwin. You worked in the mills over in Warren, and you got into the EPA. Environmental engineering is your profession.
That's right. Actually, I didn't grow up in Warren. My dad did.
Okay.
And I grew up. In Irwin. My dad did. I grew up in Warren, Ohio. So I'm a Buckeye at heart, but I'll always also be a Steeler fan at heart. Watching my dad watch his teams win Super Bowls back in the 70s while I was growing up, and then my kids watching me watch the Steelers win Super Bowls in the early 2000s was always fun. So but living in Cleveland can be very challenging for a Steeler fan.
Yeah, so. Well, I'll bet you still have nightmares about Jack Lambert tackling Brian Sipe and throwing him to the ground back in the 70s. So what motivated you to get into this kind of work?
Yeah, it was interesting. Back in my college days, I was working in steel mills, in Warren, Ohio, back in the late 80s, early 90s. And the company I worked for was Warren Consolidated Industries, and did some time in the blast furnace, did some time in the one of the finishing mills, and worked in the chem lab. And the year I was working in the chem lab, a coworker of mine had a Money magazine sitting out, so I started paging through it, and in that magazine it said one of the top 10 jobs for the 1990s was environmental engineering. And I was already going to school for civil engineering, so I just kind of focused my studies towards environmental. And sure enough, the magazine didn't lie. There were plenty of job opportunities available back in the 90s in that profession.
The bottom fell out of the steel industry, and you landed on your feet in the environmental industry.
That's right. Now we clean up all those old properties.
All those brownfield sites.
That's right. Life comes full circle.
So I know it would be fascinating to talk to you about anthrax and the water in Flint, Michigan, and all the hurricanes and natural disasters that you've been a part of. But people in our listening audience are concerned still about East Palestine, Ohio. The people who live there worried about whether their well water is safe to drink, whether they can farm this year because of the soil. What have you learned when you were on the ground?
You know, so I've been here close to 2 months now, and the one thing I've learned is the resilience of the East Palestine community. It's been impressive to see the level of understanding that many of the residents and the business folk alike have. They're gaining an understanding about just how enormous this cleanup is, but also how they can get their lives back to normal. And just to throw some statistics at you, Mike. So far to date, and we're estimating about 25% of the impacted soils have been removed, but so far about 20,000 tons of contaminated soil have been removed from that train derailment area. That's significant, and especially thinking that that's only about 25% of the impacted soil that's there, and over 11 million gallons of contaminated liquid have been removed from that area. So it's a large area of contamination that's being removed. But it's not just a derailment site, as you noted. Folks are concerned about what's happening in the air, what's happening from the after effects from the what they call the vent and burn when those 5 vinyl chloride tankers went up. And one of the things that we want to continue to assure the community is that we have one of the strongest air monitoring systems and air sampling systems ever deployed to one of these types of incidents. And we're not seeing any levels of contamination exceedances in the community from all the excavation work that's going on, both on the derailment site and also in the area waterways. Sulphur Run and Leslie Run are both heavily contaminated in certain portions of it. And as work crews are doing what we call sediment washing, we're also doing air monitoring and air sampling there to ensure that we're not having any vapor releases into the community. So it's important to recognize that even with all this contamination on site and with all this work going on, that we're being highly protective of public health by ensuring we have proper monitoring, proper sampling. We even have a bus that drives around the community. It's a real-time analytical laboratory on wheels doing real-time sampling and monitoring. It's a pretty impressive piece of equipment, and that's there full-time while operations are going on.
It sounds as though this is painstakingly slow work, not only because of the amount of soil, water that you have, or liquid that you have to take away, but just to investigate it as you're going along.
That's right. And the soil sampling program that we're just wrapping up phase 1 is a good example of that. For the past, since March 9th, so about for a month, we've sampled over 140 properties. Actually over 150 now, and we're looking for indicator chemicals from that smoke plume, and those indicator chemicals are called semi-volatile organics, and we're also looking for dioxins and furans. Those are chemical compounds that we know that the community is concerned about. All that sampling information, that data that's going to result from that sampling information will help us better inform on whether or not there have been any impacts from those smoke plumes. We don't think there have been. All the science suggests that the impacts were minimal to the community, but you don't know if you don't look, right? So the sample results as they come in, the preliminary results are showing us that we don't have significant concerns. But again, the data drives the decision, so we'll see what the data shows us.
We live in a world of high technology. You know, everything is on the internet, social media, and it was social media that first captured the plume that you were referring to that went up in the air and it looked like an atomic bomb. Although I can't say that because I'd never been around an atomic bomb before, but we still see that image of and it blows up in the black smoke and the fire and everything like that. Does that make your job harder because people witness this, or now there's a record of it and they think the absolute worst?
Oh, absolutely. And you know, Mike, they're right to think the absolute worst when you see an image like that. I mean, that was my reaction when I first saw it. I've been doing this work for over 30 years. And I'm like, when I saw it, I wasn't on scene when this vent and burn activity happened, but the images were very, very telling. But I was comforted in knowing that we had some of our best air monitoring experts on the ground while that was happening to at least make sure that the immediate community was protected. But Yeah, social media has made this a challenge. I look at the social media feeds. I see a lot of misinformation out there about the level of contamination and the types of contaminants that might be in the environment, and it's a daily challenge for us to make sure we get the right information out into the community's hands.
You're with the EPA. His name is Mark Durno. He has been with the EPA since 1997. EPA, U.S. EPA, you're a branch of the government. Nobody believes you.
That's right. That's right.
How do you do your job that way?
Yeah, and that's a product of our times, right? Trust has to be earned, and none of the people working on site from government, except for the local fire department and the mayor's office and the Columbiana County Health Department and the Columbiana County Emergency Management Agency. We've all come from somewhere else. And even though I'm an Ohio guy,
sure.
I still came from somewhere else. As a matter of fact, last time I was in East Palestine was 1986. I played football on that football field.
Okay.
So it's been interesting to see how much it's changed since the 80s. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to trust somebody that is not your neighbor. And so one of the things we've done to address the trust issues is establish a pretty strong community involvement ground game. And that is working with local leaders to help us get the message out. Work with people that the community trusts to share our information, develop some weekly newsletters, which we are doing in town, and getting the word out through other sources than those social media feeds. And we found that we're gaining some ground on the trust issues. Residents come up to us all the time and thank us for what we're doing. There are still some residents that are very skeptical, and they should be. I mean, they've suffered trauma in this town, and it's okay to to keep us at an arm's length. But for us, we just want to make sure the community knows that we're going to be here as long as it takes, and that's important.
At this time of the year, there are farmers over there, and they're tilling their soil, or at least that's what they would be doing. Fishermen, trout season in this area, fishing. Is that advisable, or should they hold off for a little while, maybe not plant the crops this year, or go fishing in those streams?
Yep. EPA's recommendation to date has been continue with normal activities. Until we have some information that suggests there's a problem away from the site, continue normal activities. We are doing sampling in air, water, and soil to prove what we believe, and that is that all those media are safe. All the preliminary results we've had to date are showing that we don't have any levels of concern in those areas. We'll know a lot more within the next month and a half. In the meantime, again, our recommendation is to continue normal activities, except down at the derailment site. Obviously, that's heavily contaminated. Stay away from the derailment site. Stay away from those sections of Leslie Run and Sulphur Run that are heavily contaminated. And those are the city have posted those. Do not access. Other than that, continue normal activities because again, the science shows us that it's okay to do that.
Okay. And in terms of people, the skeptics, the concerned people will say, yeah, but the air doesn't stay in one place. The water is running downstream. These things and the soil. So how can we go about our daily lives when you're saying, well, okay, it's good now, but maybe in 4 weeks we might find something different.
Yeah, and that's why that sampling and monitoring that I mentioned earlier is so important, especially in the air. We're going to be disturbing this, and this is let's call it what it is. It's hazardous waste now. All the soil we're digging up is hazardous waste. It's going to hazardous waste landfills or hazardous waste incinerators to be disposed of. So it's important that we continue that extremely strong air monitoring and air sampling program to make sure that the community around those work areas are safe. With respect to water, yes, there are some low-level contaminants getting into the water column. So, we advise staying out of Sulphur Run and Leslie Run for the near future. It could take several months for those rivers to start to naturally rehabilitate. What we're doing right now is a technique called sediment washing, where you agitate the sediment, bring up the contaminants into the water column, and collect, because it floats, and collect it with what we call sorbent pads on top of the water. That's how we're doing a slow remediation of those rivers. We don't want to just go in and dig it out because the ecology in those areas are very sensitive. There are some endangered species in those areas, so we're being very, very careful with the rivers. But The downside of that is it takes longer. So
Okay.
the community needs to stay aware of that.
Mark Durno is our guest. He is a Homeland Security Advisor. He works for the U.S. EPA in Region 5, and he has been in East Palestine. He's here to lend us his expertise and tell us what he knows about the site, not only from February 3rd, but going onward. We'll continue our conversation on the Best of Beaver County radio show on the St. Barnabas Radio Network. Of the many things that make St. Barnabas Health System apart from the ordinary is an appreciation for their employees, an act that does not go unnoticed. Let's learn more about what this means from one of their employees.
Hi, my name's Susan Elleteri. I'm a registered nurse at St. Barnabas. Our team is responsible for the excellent care of our residents. Tending to their specific needs is very important. We pursue compassionate care, hard work, and kindness, and it is an extremely rewarding career, and I'm very grateful to have nursing as a career. It's extremely rewarding. We can acknowledge the goodness in our life, and I do believe that.
Find out about the exceptional career opportunities St. Barnabas has to offer by visiting stbarnabashealthsystem.com/careers for more information, or by calling 724-444-JOBS. That's 724-444-5627. Find out why St. Barnabas is apart from the ordinary. Mark Durno is our guest on the Best of Beaver County radio show. Mark is a Homeland Security Advisor. He works for the U.S. EPA in Region 5 and has been in East Palestine, the site of the train derailment, for a couple of months. And he's here to talk about all that stuff and what is on the site. First responders, you said you were in Cleveland when you got the news. And when we first saw it in the area through social media or newscasts, it was immediate, and immediate response came from not only East Palestine, but from the Beaver County areas as well. Can you tell us about what was happening initially on the scene?
Yeah, for sure. You know, Ohio EPA, so each state has their version of the EPA. Pennsylvania has the Pennsylvania DEP, Department of Environmental Protection. Ohio has Ohio EPA. We're obviously U.S. EPA. So I look at us as responder 1A. We're not first responders. Your local fire and hazmat teams are your first responders. Then your state responders follow in right behind them. And then, if it's bad enough, they call us in. So not only do we bring more people, more resources, we also bring a pretty big checkbook, and we can bring a lot more resources to the scene with federal resources than can often our states. So when Ohio EPA arrived on scene, they immediately called us. And typically they'll take some time, they'll size up a response, they'll see what the environmental impacts are downwind, in the local waterways. They didn't waste any time in this one. They saw a pretty substantial fire, and this is before the big burn actually happened, right? So they saw a substantial fire. They knew that there was a waterway that was probably heavily impacted. One of the contaminants that had spilled early on was a chemical called butyl acrylate, which has a very, very low odor threshold, and it's got this acrid smell. It just smells like burnt plastic, right? And so you have the fire going on, you have the spill of this butyl acrylate and some petroleum compounds going on. You've got a creek that's heavily impacted. State calls us in. We were able to be on site and have an air monitoring network set up within the first, I'd say 5 hours, of the response actually happening. And our first arrivals on scene said this is one of the biggest train derailments they've ever seen. But at that point, it was still relatively controlled, and they knew that they could get the fire under control in a reasonable amount of time. And it wasn't really until they had to ignite those vinyl chloride cars that it really became a national story.
Yeah.
But our guys on scene, let us know that this is a big one, and we're probably going to be involved for a long time.
So that chemical that you said, butyl acrylate,
Yeah.
is that worse than vinyl chloride?
Well, it's different. So vinyl chloride is a carcinogen. Right, so prolonged exposure to vinyl chloride could be a cancer-causing agent. So our driver all along was always vinyl chloride because of the cancer factor. Right, so we wanted to make sure the community was protected against vinyl chloride. Butyl acrylate, it's at lower levels that we are seeing in the air. It's what we call a sensitizer, so it can create itchy skin. Some of the symptoms that the community has reported are consistent with butyl acrylate exposure, but I guess if there's any good news to come out of it, those are short-term exposures. They're not long-lasting health concerns. But as a sensitizer, if an individual is exposed to this chemical down the road, some glues, some paints have butyl acrylate in it. Okay. They may experience some sensitivity to those things because of that exposure that they had, that first night of the derailment. So it could cause some irritating effects down the road.
Okay, down the road. 6 weeks, 6 years.
Hard to tell.
Yeah.
I'm not a toxicologist.
Yeah.
But but everything I've read about the toxicological effects of that chemical is that it could create some sensitivity to that chemical.
Sensitivity, breathing pathways, skin.
So my concern with breathing pathways. What we understand about that particular chemical is it's a dermal sensitizer, meaning it can irritate the skin. Okay. But there are some other chemicals that were developed through the fire, like hydrogen chloride, very low levels. That could create some respiratory distress. And there are other chemicals that were involved in the fire that could create some short-term effects as well. But the long-term concerns with the carcinogenic pathways would be with that vinyl chloride chemical. That's the one we really dialed in our air monitoring to make sure that we were being protective with.
Hindsight being 2020, the actual derailment was bad enough, and then there was this controlled burn or explosion that came up afterwards. Was that necessary, or did that make matters worse?
I'll speak to you from experience.
Okay.
I've been on a few of these in the past where the right call, most likely, there's risk in every decision we make, right? The right call, most likely, in all these situations, and it's always a last resort, is to what they call vent and burn one of these cars, which where you put charges on both sides of the rail car. One allows air to go in, the other allows the liquid to drop out, and then the flares in the pit underneath. That's what ignites, and that's the big cloud of smoke that we saw. Again, there's always trade-offs. The question that I'm guessing the investigative process long-term will tell us is whether or not it was necessary to vent and burn all 5 cars. EPA learned the night before that burn that one car was going to be vent and burned, and then the next morning we learned it was all 5. The experts on scene that were brought in to do the work said it was necessary. Sometimes you just got to trust the experts.
What was amusing about all that, and you probably saw it as well, is that in the aftermath, everybody's pointing fingers, and it all ends up with the local fire chief, and it's like he probably has the least knowledge of it all.
That's right. But at the end of the day, the way all responses are local, and so at the end of the day, the local fire or hazmat lead is the one that ultimately needs to say, you know what, yes or no. I mean, it's his community that's at risk. And Mayor Conaway, said it very well at a recent town hall meeting. He said, we went with the information we had, and he made his decision. I support his decision. And again, there were a lot of people in the room when that decision was made. And again, you're weighing risks. Do you risk one of these rail cars exploding? That's what you're weighing that risk against. So
and we're talking
never an easy decision.
Yeah, right. Mark Durno is our guest. He's with the EPA, and they're investigating in East Palestine. And I keep hearing you say, well, we're waiting to see because the studies are still out. I remember when it happened, and they said, well, we're taking the air qualities, but we won't know for 6 weeks. And you continue to say, in the future, we can continue to monitor this. Is this going to turn out like some of the other disasters that occurred in the United States, Love Canal, and where 20 years from now we learn, oh yeah, by the way, you guys should have been evacuated and taken out of that town?
So I highly doubt it. So let's talk timelines, right? You're talking, when you mentioned Love Canal, you're mentioning one of the largest Superfund sites, at least in its time. Is the original Superfund site, as a matter of fact, was Love Canal. We anticipate the bulk of that contamination. I talked numbers earlier about how much tonnage has been removed to date. We anticipate the bulk of the hazardous waste that's on that site to be gone by the end of June. It might take a little bit longer, but we're not talking years. We're talking months, and only a couple months. Then we go into that long-term monitoring phase. So one of the things we haven't talked about today is groundwater.
Wells
Wells,
over
exactly. We had the municipal wells, which luckily are up gradient from the site, so groundwater flows away, from those wells towards the site. So we're not worried about those wells. But Ohio EPA has set up what they call Sentinel monitoring well network to check groundwater routinely over the next several years. So that's the long-term stuff we're talking about, monitoring groundwater to make sure that the municipal wells are safe, but also the potable wells. Over 200 wells in Ohio, private drinking water wells, over 70 wells in Pennsylvania have been tested so far, both by Columbiana County Health in Ohio and Pennsylvania DEP here in PA. And so far, no contaminants of concern from the derailment have been seen in any of those samples. But we know that it's impossible to get every molecule of waste out of the ground. We know that, and the long-term monitoring is going to be hugely important to ensuring that public health is protected. The well sampling is going to go on for years.
That doesn't, and I don't live out there, but I can't imagine that gives anyone a sense of security, because you might have tested their wells yesterday and you come back in 2 weeks. Today it was good. Next week, and they said, well, we've been using this well water for the last 2 weeks. What do you mean? What's it going to do to us? That's
a great point, Mike. And that's why the Sentinel well part of this is very important. Also, the sampling is going to be done through the sediments and coring around the rivers to see what the impact of those spills were in those areas. Because again, these wells don't just pull from the groundwater.
Yeah.
There is some connectivity between surface water and shallow groundwater. And again, it's this monitoring and testing that's going to be done over the long term that's going to tell us that there's a problem. Over the first couple of years, that monitoring is going to be a lot more frequent. So if it's traveling, if contamination, subsurface contamination, if it's there and it's traveling, hopefully we'll see it long before it hits anybody's well.
We just have a few minutes left, but as a person who's been intimately involved in these sort of things for the past 25 years or so, what can you recommend to our listening audience about going forward now?
Sure. First, pay attention. We are putting out weekly newsletters. You can find it on EPA's website. Just Google EPA East Palestine train derailment. You'll find our website. We put out weekly newsletters. I think we're going to move that to every other week as things become more routine. And believe it or not, even though we still consider this an emergency, things are becoming a little bit more routine. Truck traffic is moving on a routine basis. We're getting more waste out every day than we were. The air sampling and air monitoring is not changing because we're continuing to see safe levels in the community. Our first phase of our soil sampling is done. Now we're just waiting on results. So as things become more routine, we don't need to get information out every day. So about every other week, you'll see one of those newsletters. So my recommendation: pay attention. If you live in Darlington, if you live in the Greater East Palestine area, if you live in Negley or Unity Township in Ohio, pay attention to what's going on, and you'll just start to see the accomplishments on site growing every week.
And if people have concerns and questions, where can they turn? Is there an EPA site?
There is. EPA does have a community center in town, and that community center is staffed. Right now, it's 8 to 8 every single day. I think we're going to reduce those hours based on what we've been seeing in the community in terms of use. But check our hours. Come by our community center. Talk to us. We're more than happy to sit down. We can talk in general terms. We can talk in technical terms. We do. One of the things we love doing is getting information in the hands of the residents who are interested. So
I'd love to have a longer conversation about this and all your other experiences. But thank you for taking the time today. Mark Durno is from the EPA, and they're in East Palestine monitoring the situation. Thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, and thanks for having us, Mike. And again, we really appreciate you guys helping us get the word out about the progress on site.
This is the Best of Beaver County radio show on the St. Barnabas Radio Network. Our guest, Mark Durno from the U.S. EPA. I'm Mike Romigh. Stay safe, and we'll talk again.
When you think about retirement, what images come to mind? Why not let yourself imagine enjoying an exceptional retirement lifestyle at the Village at St. Barnabas in Gibsonia? Attainable luxury can become yours because the Village has no large upfront fees, and it's based on a simple annual no-risk contract. The only decision to make is when to move in. Call 724-443-0700 or click stbarnabashealthsystem.com.
Thank you for listening to the Best of Beaver County. St. Barnabas is pleased to have provided content and sponsorship for the program. Tune in this Sunday at 11:30 for an encore presentation of today's program on Beaver County Radio. And next Thursday at 11 for another edition of the Best of Beaver County on WBVP, WMBA, and 99.3 FM.